extend the conversation talking about advertising, delivery, what you need to know about delivering that inventory and making it work for brands and what metrics really matter to them. So we have Sophie from Neon Labs, Adam Paulisick from Nielsen, and Mike Henry from Outrigger. Definitely, if you have any questions, just shoot your hands up in the audience and we can keep this really interactive. But I'm going to go ahead and let you guys each give a little bit of an introduction on yourselves and where you're coming from as you're looking at the ad space and working with brands.
Hey, I'm Sophie. I'm the CEO of Neon. Neon is a company that optimizes video viewership and engagement by finding the best frame from that stream of video to be used as the thumbnail. So it's interesting. I felt I could have been on a panel this morning because our approach is very heavily based in neuroscience, computer vision, and there's all sorts of algorithmic approaches that we have to selecting that frame that I'm happy to talk about offline. But what we're interested in here is how do we find the right frame to maximize engagement, be it for brands, be it for media publishers, and then we have a variety of analytics that we use in order to be able to communicate the effectiveness of those images to drive engagement for the publishers, and then we use those to optimize in real time.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Adam Paulisick. I work for a joint venture of the Nielsen company and Catalina Marketing. Those two combined give us access to an awful lot of purchase data that we try to help measure media campaigns with across television and, of course, the digital ecosystem as well as mobile, print, and radio. So interested to talk a lot today about how we value content in individual media units and talk about it from the brand managers or marketers perspective in particular.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Mike Henry. I'm the CEO of Outrigger Media. We're a software and analytics company based here in New York, and our focus is on helping brand advertisers understand and navigate native digital video. And one of the key things that we do is through a platform called OpenSlaate, we measure things like engagement, consistency, influence and momentum, brand safety, and subject matter expertise for all ad-supported content on YouTube. And so we do that so that brands can figure out where they want to be and where they don't want to be, and essentially they use our data for targeting.
Great. So I'm actually going to draw a little bit from Eric's presentation that he was just giving. He broke it down into 4 different areas: contextual relevance, ad viewability, social impact, and then return on investment. I feel like you guys are all sort of touching on those 4 buckets. We'll get into that social debate a little bit later, but I'm interested. Let's start at the contextual relevance side of things. I think that from Mike's perspective and maybe Sophie, your side as well, like how are you guys seeing brands really optimizing for that contextual relevance, either really early in the campaign to get a viewer to want to click that video, or even when you're advising them on where should this ad be delivered so that we're getting the right types of people contextually? Right. Go whoever first.
Yeah, so I mean, what we're looking at is a massively fragmented and huge market for brand advertisers to touch their consumer. And interestingly, when they're thinking about advertising in video, they've got their brand advertising hat on, right? And so it's so interesting to be here today because we're constantly being pressed to better understand the nature of the content. And it matters now because this is fast becoming an important brand advertising medium. You know, it was one thing to not be here 5 years ago, but there are certain audiences now that if you're not advertising online, if you're not thinking about video content and advertising today, you can't reach your audience, right? So you have to figure out how to be there. And so they're being forced to push out beyond stuff that is easy to consider premium and easy to evaluate, like stuff from ABC and CBS and Discovery, into stuff that doesn't look like what they're used to. And so obviously on YouTube, everything looks mostly like stuff you're not used to. Some of it's appropriate for your brand and some of it's not. So I think the key is that when you're thinking with your brand advertising hat on, things like the nature and the quality of content matter, but they're different for every brand. And so what we do with OpenSlaate is we help them by giving them as much data as we can. We're looking at 70 million videos every day and every piece of data about them, aggregating it, normalizing it, and telling them that if you're concerned about brand safety and brand safety means this to you, then go here and not here. If your definition of quality hinges on things like engagement metrics rather than influence metrics, go here and not here. And ultimately it scales up, and to the point of the last presentation, it works now, and it's important today because it's the programmatic tools that are letting advertisers then apply those rules at scale and address a TV-like audience. At least today we're very focused on YouTube.
Yeah, so that's going to dovetail into letting Sophie answer that question as well. But how are you looking at? I know you come from a background of digital media and you've been in this business for a long time. How do you look at what's happening off of YouTube as well in terms of building a brand strategy? YouTube is obviously a large portion of that, but we're starting to see Facebook, we're starting to see AOL, other publishers that are really active in this video space as well. So how can they shape their strategy based on that?
Maybe I'll let Adam. We were out there just talking about how social plays into the conversation and how the difference between an original view and a passed along view, and maybe you want to run with that.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. I think today we look at it from slightly different perspectives. I think that there's an argument that says, hey, the content is all where it matters, and this sort of rise of fit, in addition, sort of the placement of inventory, makes a lot of sense. And then there's people like me that argue that it has nothing to do with the fit necessarily, but rather the audience that actually exists around what that content actually attracts. Above and beyond that, I think people are constantly striving to figure out then not just when the content will be the most relevant or the audience is the perfect fit, but ultimately how it's going to get amplified afterwards. So, I think that's where we're sort of at now. I'm not totally sure if I understand exactly how to describe social in a way that doesn't make me want to throw myself off the stage in any short form. Just because I don't believe in the concept that there is a separate type of media than sort of brand or not branded media. And we were talking about the distinction that there's either media you can control and there's media you can't control. And sometimes you pay for stuff you can and can't control, indirectly or directly. So I think that's kind of the sort of summary point of view. But I would offer that it's much more, in my view, a little bit about the audience you're trying to attain, and that social is just simply better, quirkier tools to kind of make that contagious or not. And then that appears in both premium places than obviously on YouTube as well.
There's a couple of different things going on there, right? But I think we both agree that if it's video or it's not as well. And video is different because it's much more emotionally engaging, and that's important for brand advertising and all that goes along with being a brand advertiser. So you could extend your argument for, what if it's not YouTube but Facebook or Twitter or somewhere else, the other direction towards TV. It's video is video, and there's certain emotional, very evocative, important brand things that are going on inside it. And so you need to think of it holistically as video, and maybe not get so hung up on where that player may be going. Because video on YouTube is probably 50% off of YouTube anyway.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny that you're bringing up the fact that video is more engaging, but it's funny because Sophie actually has to capture people with something that's so static as the thumbnail, right? So how do you loop people in on that? How are you guys A/B testing, and what's your approach on that?
Yeah, so I think, to you guys' point, brands are using video, they're much more emotional, and they take a ton of time and effort to create the video. And so if you think about it, you've done all of this work, put all of these resources into creating a video, and the real question is, how do you get people to watch it? And how do you get a lot of people to watch it? And so what we're interested in is basically saying, you can represent that video with a thumbnail. Maybe down the road it will be with GIFs, maybe it will be summarization. We've seen all sorts of ways today of how you can represent video. But let's say at the moment the norm is the thumbnail. How do you do that in a way that you're going to get as many people in viewing your video? And JJ asked about A/B testing. I think that one of the themes today has been images represent content on our visual web. So if we want people to engage in content, we need to have the right image to do that. But how do we know what the right image is? So we can start with algorithms to make that selection, but the reality is people want to know, does this shit work? Am I really optimizing? Am I getting the most views? And I think the only way to really answer that question is with a data-driven approach. And so if you want to get data out from the effectiveness of your video campaign and the role that the thumbnail plays, now you need to A/B test. So at Neon, for example, if we serve a video thumbnail for someone, we always serve a baseline thumbnail, which allows us to say, this is if you just use a random image to represent your content. This is if you use an optimized image that's driven for emotional engagement. And what are the increasing views that you get from that? And now, as we think about sort of real-time data, and social is an interesting example of this because people are liking and responding and sharing, but how can you get a data source in real time to make sure you know that the image is the most effective. And so at Neon, we'll A/B test. We'll have that real-time data loop where we're learning in any given moment, is this the right frame to represent this video, or could we find a better one for our customer? And if it's not significantly increasing lift for them, then we'll automatically switch it out. And so I think what that does is it sort of brings together video, the image that represents the video, A/B testing, which allows you to monitor engagement in real time, and then optimization. So you're not just sitting on those learnings, but you're taking that data stream and you're using it to make your video campaign more effective in that moment.
What's the data set looking like before you guys make that pivot into a new thumbnail, or you decide, okay, we're not getting the click-through that we're wanting to achieve right now, so let's try a different thumbnail? I mean, is it when you hit a certain impressions, you analyze that impression, or is it a certain time gap that you're looking at? How does that look?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we sort of stumbled across a roadblock with this when we initially rolled it out, which is, so essentially what the system was initially set up for is when you see a significant difference, so usually that comes in at about 10,000 views, you'll start to see, ooh, this image is doing significantly better than this image, so therefore that feedback is strong enough that I'm going to change it. But what happens if you've got two mediocre images? Now neither one is getting more clicks, and you're sort of stuck in this lockstep of like, do I optimize or don't I? And so we made a change that our system is actually set at like a plus 5% CTR. So if the Neon thumbnail isn't at least 5% ahead of the baseline thumbnail, then that itself sends out a signal to switch it out. And so it really can depend on how big the publisher or the advertiser is to know how much traffic they get. Some of the larger ones, you can be looking at flicking through thumbnails on the order of minutes. Some people it's days, some people it's hours. It's really driven by how much traffic you're getting.
So we've talked about kind of the entry point, a little bit about the middle. Adam, you're looking directly at what's our return on investment, that final bucket that Eric pointed to. How are you guys evaluating that on a real time or even like a long tail basis?
Sure, yeah, happy to. We're lucky enough to see a lot of really smart technologists, most of which we could never build. And so, but we also have the disadvantage of having to talk to a lot of brand marketers and managers that don't understand technology. And so we get this almost myopic view on the only thing I want to hear from you is, did it sell more product or not? And it could be automobiles or consumer electronics or consumer packaged goods or whatever it is. So, a lot of the evolution we saw historically was that there was all these great metrics out there to describe awareness. And, did people even acknowledge that this was my own brand? Did they see it as separate from the content or some combination thereof? Then it evolved into this, well, if I know that, and there's all these sort of very cliche now symbols and icons for, is there some affinity there? And do I like it? And then it started getting really interesting for people like us, because they said, well, how do I show intent, and what's that mean? And a lot of premium publishers talk about that as referrals and amplification, and then people like us kind of come in at the very end and say, you know what, it's not our job to tell you if you fit with the right audience or necessarily if the creative message was the right place, but compared to the X number of dollars you were spending every month previous to having a media exposure, are you spending more than X? And so we think all day long about how do you take someone's offline life and actually merge that with an online life or a mobile life or a big screen, small screen, however you want to sort of think about it. And then that's where we kind of play, because we found that no matter how hard we try to explain that there is something to be said for how somebody interacts with the content and how long they stay, and if they have some sort of favorite mechanism, the only thing the advertiser will continue to support is, did you move $3 more than the $7 the household bought last month? Or did you buy a car in 12 months as opposed to 24?
Tell the audience a little bit. I think we all found it interesting. We were talking before how you guys are connecting the offline and the online worlds, and how you're able to granularly identify if they were able to drive
Did we find it interesting or a little scary?
Scary.
Scary.
Brother.
There's a little bit
Big
of both.
brother.
Yeah, so thankfully, I'm sure there's like a Nielsen NSA partnership around me, just hovering right above my head. But no, we're very fortunate. So the way that technology has evolved, for everybody who has not been put to sleep for this earlier, is that everyone's online identity existed, and there's these little text files that get dropped on your computer, and there's ways to sort of do that on phones and other devices. And then, of course, your offline life is very tangible to us in the room. So you swipe a credit card and it exists. All of that comes back to sort of social security numbers and ultimately credit scores. Thankfully, Nielsen Catalina and Nielsen have nothing to do with that, but you might recognize brands like Experian, TransUnion, Axiom. These are your credit unions, so if you've ever bought a house or needed to have been evaluated for some purchase, then they give you back the score and you figure out if you are capable or if you are homeless or somewhere in between. And for us, we depend on those folks to have an ID. So everyone in this room that lives at a house has a ZIP +6 identifier, or an 11-digit number that actually means this is my postal box. And that postal box, for probably a longer time than all of us realized, including me, has been attributed information. So it could be purchase information. It also could be things like demographics, like the census that actually occurs every 10 years, and everything in between. And there's lots of companies that, outside of Nielsen, of course, that do lots of this. And then what occurred is, in the beginning, big portal companies, if everyone wondered why your email address was free, is because they were registering you, right? And then every time you came on to have a session, they could understand who you were, and they could give you things that made your life a lot easier. And for anyone who hates cookies or thinks privacy is, purely about activism, you should remind yourself that every time you walk into your living room, you don't want to push your furniture in the same place. And that's exactly what these publishers were doing. And so today, much like we do for consumer packaged goods advertisers and agencies and inventory owners like the MSNs and the AOLs, et cetera, everyone else has these identifiers that are anonymized and then tie behind this very, very guarded wall with people like Experian to match the 2 points up. So if you want to do a campaign and ultimately measure it, it's great to know all these kind of contextual elements and make sure the media gets used and has the greatest sense of engagement, or whatever the kids are calling it these days. But at the end of it, you still need to know, did somebody who saw this media impression in their emerging media life actually do something in their offline life? Because most purchases, round about 90%, depending on whose number, still happen in this offline environment.
So I think an interesting debate maybe that we could have up here, maybe you guys would all be in agreement, but when talking about ROI, I think that's very different for a lot of brands. Some brands just want awareness. Some brands want to track how many sales did I actually make? Some people want to say how viral did this campaign go, and how much cooler are we in the eyes of X, Y, and Z demographic, right? So for each of you, what do you think are the key metrics that brands should be optimizing for and looking for? Is it the physical product that's being sold, or is it that elevation, and what do you think is the most important?
I'd agree with that, and ultimately they want to sell stuff, right? That's all they care about. That's what they should be optimizing for. But there are some limits. It's not a perfect world where every impression can be mapped to an offline action or any action. So I think when people talk about, not everybody here is in the marketing world. When people talk about a marketing purchase funnel, it's important to realize that there's lots of different paths into that funnel, and then there's lots of different steps you take down that funnel. And the closer you get to that, field goal or touchdown or whatever is fantastic. But every step along the way is going to be different for every brand, and therefore the things that they correlate success to that aren't a sale are going to be different for every brand. And I think the key is to, especially from a visual technology perspective, and for people in this audience, what we were talking about earlier is one of the things that I don't think anybody's doing, and somewhere between the three of us and one of you, there's a fantastic opportunity we were talking about correlating to content, success to content. So however far down you get in that funnel, what about the content mattered, right? Because I don't agree that content is just a proxy for audience. There's other things that are going on. If all you ever wanted to do was target a woman 18 to 24 and nothing else mattered, there would be no cable channels. Cable channels exist because a lot of them exist because they aggregate not just a certain type of audience, but a certain type of content. And advertisers are often making subjective calls about what type of content to be in. It's not just audience, but it would be very, very cool if you could get inside the anatomy of a video and identify things in that video, whether it was, we were talking about retention or attention, or is it a high moment or a low moment in the video? Is it this color versus that color? If you can take that thing, those different patterns or those different markers or signals, and attach it to one of those things in the marketing funnel, that is genius. And I think that would be a huge opportunity, a huge idea that brand advertisers would glom onto very quickly.
Yeah, and we were sort of talking, I guess now we're pitching our startup. We were talking about, if there's been so much interesting technology here, if somebody was sort of looking at at thinking about where you insert that pre-roll or the mid-roll if you do it intelligently. So as you're analyzing all of the video content, is there the right place, like Mike was saying, where it's like the user is on a high, like they're feeling good, so therefore now is the time to put the ad in, or they're feeling uninterested, so they've lost attention, so now is the time to put the ad in. But I think there's all sorts of interesting things to explore, kind of in using data to place ads in video more intelligently.
Quick question for all of you. Answer whoever hears first. How many seconds is it before you can hit skip on a YouTube video? You know, how many?
I don't know.
5. What's the recording length of a Vine? 6 seconds. So do you ever think there will be a merger of you have to grab the attention of this millennial audience in 5 or 6 seconds and keep them there? Do you ever think that we'll see this like micro advertising where forget getting past that 5 seconds, it's just going to be that 5 seconds? And how do you guys see that playing out? I know it's a little off the beaten path, but I'd be interested in hearing your perspective.
It's an interesting question. I think those two are completely different though, because in a YouTube, in a TrueView ad, you have to capture their attention, but you don't have to give them the full payoff. You have to capture their attention. In a Vine, it's everything, right? But I do think that all brands are going to be forced, largely because of mobile, and because shorter form content prevails between YouTube and mobile. It's all about shorter form content. And 30 seconds is too much, 15 seconds is often too much. They're going to be forced into smaller and smaller containers, especially across devices. So I do think it's an interesting thing to continue to push yourself towards and develop technology and analytics to support the decisions around, because it's happening. And in some cases, the guy who can tell the message the quickest is going to win, because they'll be able to bid most aggressively on inventory that nobody else can use.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the stuff that Adam was saying about the fact that we can track and we know who the people are, it could be that what you're doing is starting a longer form communication with the user. So maybe it's like a quick 6 seconds, but you know you're going to get that person an hour from now. So you don't have to get all your messaging into a 1.5 minute ad, but you can kind of uncover it over time.
Yeah, just to bolt on one quick point to that, I think that there's this elusive kind of path to purchase for everybody, what they're doing, and I think the shorter form you get, the more specific the location has to be, whether it's a virtual transaction or an offline real transaction. And I think that is actually going to dilute the pressure that a lot of people feel shrinking it down, because it'll be at a better and better moment in their consideration, which I think will give a lot of relief to everybody worried about trying to do the 3-second burst. If the 3-second burst is the moment before you pull on the car dealership, or the moment before you check out on Amazon, or the combination of.
Thanks so much, guys. I think we're running a little bit tight on time. Do we have time for any questions from anybody? No? Sorry, guys. Questions.
Great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.